Hi, my name is Kyle Damon. I'm a project leader and co-founder at Elevated Executive, and I'm making this video series for mental health advocacy and harm reduction purposes. This series is meant to empower and support passionate community-level leadership and help our societies confidently navigate the changes ahead. So at Elevated Executive, we train leaders how to operate new paradigm businesses in the arena of conscious economics. From AI to aliens, change is coming, and most of us were simply educated to operate in a scarcity-based, pre-technology economy that is rapidly disappearing. I'm also making this series at a time where a lot of people realize they have some healing to do. Not just healing, but serious upgrades to their diet, lifestyle, and social circles. Indeed, all of this change can be unsettling, especially if you are not feeling healthy or well. For now, I invite you to relax into these ideas and just let them tickle your brain a little bit and see what insight arises for you. And if you or someone you know is suffering from a mental health challenge, there is help, and I encourage you to take the first step either for yourself or a loved one. There are resources in the description for you to consider. So, this series is also about evolving our minds to keep up with the rapid pace of societal evolution, and what I assert is the likely positive planetary future we are actually most probably headed towards. The real question is, positive future for who? On some level, we are all responsible for our own well being and connection to our creative source, but I also feel we have an opportunity to uplift our communities at this time in new and powerful ways. And still, in times of rapid societal transformation, I feel we are being asked to question everything we thought we knew, which brings with it, by definition, the chance to rewrite and hopefully improve the source code of society towards one that's more transparent and beneficial for more people. As global power structures reform around the world right before our eyes, we can either dig a hole and hide, or we can get involved and transform existing systems into what we all sense they have the potential to become in this new paradigm. And I get it, not everyone believes that they are healthy enough to make a difference. And while in many ways, whatever limitation you believe to be true about yourself, you will manifest it in your life, and you will usually blame someone else or the current condition of your body that you believe you may not be capable, or that the world or the community you're in may not be worth investing in. These are all aspects we need to consider about ourselves and why we may not be standing where we think we should be, because ultimately it all starts and ends with the self and evolving the self-image to align more with health, positivity, synchronicity, healing, and connectedness. That's what this series is all about. And this is where people can either choose to get cynical and reactive, or maintain some degree of an open mind and consider that you may have more power over your life than you presently realize or you may presently be currently exercising. Alas, I believe the future belongs to the builders and the action takers. Okay, so this is the last episode in what I call abstract reasoning and big picture thinking. It's meant to help aspiring community leaders expand their perspective beyond the fearful, scarcity-based tribal dynamics of mistrust and superstition that were the hallmark of the old paradigm and still saturate many or most communities around the world today. However, real shifts are beginning to take place, and this is where your leadership is needed. Please understand that most people operating on planet Earth are still struggling with operating primarily from fear and or survival-based rationalizations that keep them feeling poor, playing small, or feeling stuck and sick no matter how hard they work or how much material resource they acquire or control. This dynamic is true for individuals and for entire societies. In the next episode, I'm going to bring you right with me into the beating heart of our global initiative to help facilitate peace through trade and conscious commerce, and where I believe that the intersection may potentially interface with the societies that are not human, some who appear to have lived quietly in and around this planet for thousands of years, and also societies that most people have no idea about, and yet other societies who claim to be from other planets but have a strong connection to humanity through genetic lineage and coevolution, some whose names you may have heard of. This we will discuss in the next episode. So, to keep moving with today's session, where does the human template originate, and how did humans get here the way they are? And why are we so vastly different than everything else on this beautiful planet? And what does it mean to live awake and aware in the age of awakening that we appear to be living through? If you've watched the previous videos of this series, you know that I'm not anti-religious, but old world religion to me is becoming a bit of a museum piece from a pre-internet legacy, largely derived from our pre-literate ancestors that did their best to explain the world while also keeping their societies within some degree of organized, controlled populations through shaping their breeding patterns, belief systems, and worldview. No question that these stories are powerful. So powerful they can put entire armies on boats willing to die for whatever cause they believe in. However, If you look at declining church, temple, and mosque attendance around the world, it's clear humanity is looking for new ways to connect to their spirituality and their communities. So, what about the global economics and cultural stories of the future that will help us build healthy, sovereign, and balanced international relationships? What stories will drive our productive and peaceful future? And what stories do we need to collectively let go of that are destructive and based in perhaps superstition? These are the challenges of our time. I've also recently reached the conclusion that the partial or distorted truths that have become the hallmark of the seed of today's most violent religions and ideologies are the ones we must question in open forum, which just so happens to be like pouring salt on a wound for most people carrying religious supremacist ideologies that often justify and rationalize initiation of violence and suppression of other people. And that if we want greater global harmony, a higher level of understanding of the greater human story must be shared with the human race. That is what I'm inviting leaders to help me do as a result of this series. Perhaps a story that has been kept from society at large, for various reasons, for seasons and aeons of time. I also think it's fair to say that important information that is kept from someone is just as damaging as malnutrition, or information that is distorted or weaponized can also be just as damaging to the development and the potential of the individual or even of an entire society. This is exactly how countries can create an entire generation of radicals, which takes about 20 years. Any student of history knows these stories well, which we will not go into here today. However, when neighbors are radicalizing and abusing their people, do we do ourselves any favors by turning a blind eye? If only being pro-peace rendered us more capable to keep the peace. Now, as we discussed what it means to heal and help others heal from religious trauma, I also invite you to look at the idea of Christ consciousness and other so-called divine and profound messages of unity as a human being's best attempt to understand and describe a multidimensional experience or understanding, perhaps, of how the laws of physical reality actually work in higher dimensions. The dimensions that lower beings are apparently not able to access or access as easily. In that sense, emotional frequencies of fear, domination, and oppression seem to lock the nervous system out of the higher frequencies that render us more able to access solutions and insights of harmony, unity, and transcendence. In other words, a foundational step of stepping beyond religion is found in knowing that we can strive to honor the various prophets and teachers of times past who encountered otherworldly phenomena who did their best to translate what they experienced into verbal and written knowledge for the people of their time, which, over time, seems to have a propensity to turn into dogma and even oppression. In the last episode, we briefly discussed something I called the religion of the star travelers, and how those who appear to travel to and visit our planet from vast distances and timelines tend to speak, think, and believe. However, in my research, most of them tend to speak of these ideas as not so much as a religion, but the foundation for their understanding of physics and their technology, not just a long inherited, dusty, and hollowed out belief system from some ancestors long ago. Perhaps a merging of science, spirituality, and technology. And that most of these beings who interact with our species have genetic relations to us going back hundreds of thousands of years. If you are just joining this series, it's important you know I have 20 years of hands-on, first-hand experience interviewing and studying contactees, including those who claim to be a part of the ongoing extraterrestrial hybridization program that has allegedly been happening on our planet for hundreds of thousands of years. Not only that, but this story is also allegedly the story of how humans got here like this, so vastly different from all other mammals, and why many of human culture's oldest origin stories begin with off-world intervention by advanced beings. So, what about God, angels, demons, and the cast of astral characters billions have been taught that was the only truth and the whole truth, and so on? In this series, I invite you to keep an open mind and consider that most of the cultural stories that were handed down to our ancestors simply did the best they could to interpret the most extraordinary circumstances of the time into a collective narrative for a population that was composed largely of illiterate farmers and soldiers. Belief is an interesting word, and I'm now convinced that religion is essentially what crops up in the absence of a sufficiently involved science that can measure and map the connectedness of all things. Not that you need a spreadsheet and advanced math equations to cultivate a feeling of connection to the reality we all share, but belief is a borderline disempowering emotion. What about knowingness? What about working with information, resources, and intuition that you can experiment with and directly put to the test yourself? No need to rely on a long chain of middlemen and interpretations, etc. So what about belief and evidence? I'm not here to convince you of anything, rather to give you permission to think beyond the box you were culturally conditioned to stay within. and perhaps to help you ask and form new questions that may help you start getting better answers in the results you seek in your life situation. But for me personally, I found my life is best lived by treating reality as a dynamic experiment. In that, you will have to do your own research, conduct your own experiments, and see what works for you. Still, the more I awaken to the probable multidimensionality of the existence we all share, the more I realize people lock themselves out of certain dimensional awareness for various reasons, either through emotions like denial, anger, grief, or just distraction, or even something simply not being relevant for this current stage on a person's journey. In many ways, it's very important that we take an unbiased stance for where a person is on their journey of evolution. And this can be especially challenging when it comes to loved ones and family members. And some of us are called to seek further, to go deeper, and to question everything. This series is to support seekers and those who feel called to build a new way for the societies and communities. And I and many others have found that if you seek sincerely like a scientist striving to keep a balanced mind, you just might be surprised by the doorways that open up for you. The challenge I see is that most people alive today oscillate wildly between religious, faith-based euphoria and soul-crushing doubt of those same ideas. Instead of planting their own feet on knowingness in the rational middle ground, to me, this is the type of traumatic imprints religion, in all of its contradictions and misinterpretations, leave with a person. And in some ways, some societies and cultures just aren't that scientifically inclined, and I think that's a fascinating idea regarding what it means to respect, or at least protect, an evolving people from their own ignorance. At what point does help become harm? And at what point does insisting on peace become violence itself? These are the challenges of our time. You don't have to look any further than the God of the Abrahamic faith to see a bipolar, vengeful, murderous tyrant. Is it any wonder devout followers arrive at a conclusion of justified violence perpetually? Something that was clearly written to guide an ancient people to and through regional survival that is trying to be applied in modern times. It's a wild thing to witness, isn't it? Alas, to a skeptic, no evidence will suffice, and to a devout believer, no evidence will cause them to question. It is these extreme and locked mindsets that can cause unnecessary suffering and keep people playing small and fearful. To heal and help our communities heal from religious trauma, we must carefully unravel the thread of stories we've received while striving to keep the good elements, while honoring those who did their best to share their stories with us, while also realizing the extremely limited source material they had to work with before the internet, copies of copies of copies, and so on. But as this unraveling and resorting happens in our culture, it all comes down to this. When it's time to walk away and permanently change our behavior, our social circle, and even our family support structure, what do we do as individuals, or as an individual, mapping our own path through life? That's what this specific video is all about, and many are afraid to let go of their belief systems because they are anchored to family acceptance or fear of abandonment from questioning too far out of the inherited family frame and belief system, or simply by perpetuating the belief they live in a hostile universe governed by an angry, bipolar, sky daddy creator. So they justify low-integrity actions with low-integrity actors, etc. This means people tend to show up guarded, cynical, and expecting negative outcomes from nearly every single angle and situation, believing they are unable to move as they wish through life and through their life situations. So, many use their negative filter to sort the world while never doing any actual experimentation or research against their current belief set. And if you don't test against your old beliefs, there's no real way to prove them to yourself. So, here's to the experiment. And this feedback loop turns people into what I call cryptic trolls, living out quiet or violent lives of desperation, expressing their hostilities and fantasies of retaliation in social media comments, and for some, in real life through violence, etc. This type of troll energy represents someone who has some healing to do, and often it's best to let people who have their troll era going on have it for as long as they need to, so long as they're not hurting others or themselves. And to be fair, many regions around the world are still living under the threat of religious and race-justified violence. Please take this as a warning that if someone is highly volatile, you don't usually do them or yourselves a service by trying to interrupt their patterns. Unless you believe their life or others' lives are in danger, the links in the descriptions are there for your use. So, what about you? Where do you live on this spectrum? As humans, we have all experienced these ranges of emotions from time to time, but it's where you live most of the time that determines the quality of your life experience. I shared in a recent episode that the further I walk away from religious ideology and those who circulate those ideas, the more peaceful, supportive, rewarding, enjoyable, and holistic and lucky my life becomes. In that sense, Earth is a big place, and if you are feeling a desire to change your community, sometimes moving to one that supports you is the most viable option. So, as we reflect on these ideas and unbind ourselves to others' choices, we can experience a greater range of emotions and dimensional connectedness if that is our desire. One thing you want to be aware of as you open yourself to testing and experimenting in this way is that you never have to convince anyone of anything you experience unless you choose to try, in which most cases you shouldn't. Why? Because people have to decide for themselves, and it's always better to let your results and countenance do the talking, not something strange that happened to you on a nature hike, or something that is hard to explain to others that they wouldn't understand and, quite honestly, might confuse or frustrate them. You want to identify that part of you that feels you must share these things with people who maybe don't want to hear them. With that said, it's a sign of wisdom to choose carefully who you share your miracles with. And remember, words are only one way to share your truth, especially when it comes to experiencing accelerated luck, synchronicity, and extra dimensional support and experiences that our reality appears to offer for those who are ready for it, in my own personal experimentation. What does it say about a person who feels compelled to endlessly verbalize to an audience that it is not interested or it is clearly demonstrated they don't want to hear it? This is a type of belligerence that will not grant you elegant passage into the life of greater peace, power, and purpose that you say you want. What are you ready for? In my experience, most of these incredible, miraculous, and life-changing experiences are best and most nourishing and healing for when they are kept between you and those who experience them directly, because they are often meant for just you and your development, or for the catalyzation of a special relationship between you and another, sometimes for one day, or maybe sometimes for a lifetime. Relationships are, of course, another area where people get hung up. We fill them with so much expectation that we crush the natural and easy flow of what the relationship wants to be for our highest and best good. This is where we are wise to avoid amassing expectation, which inevitably leads to insistence, which opens us up to suffering and disappointment. What is it that you believe you must insist upon and try through effort, frustration, and fighting to convince others of? We all have these edges of passion that can turn negative if we don't balance them with healthy spiritual perspective. Honoring each person's connection to their own source, soul, and purpose for learning the lessons they need, in many ways just like how you learn the lessons you need, same as me. Usually through a few hard knocks, and only through ignorance do we generate sufficiently uncomfortable or painful situations that ensure we don't repeat the same mistakes again. In many ways, we deny others their chance to learn if we insist they should or shouldn't do things certain ways. These are the challenges of our time. In the next episode, we're going to talk about the dangers of ego inflation and what profound spiritual or extra-dimensional experiences can do to the human psyche if they are not sufficiently integrated and processed. This is true of those seeking healing through psychedelic plants and other means as well. Periods of healthy integration, nutrition, self-care, and accountability to a healthy community are important to leaders leading a healthy life and healing from trauma of all types. I have found that when I am able to stay present, stay focused, and let the universe surprise and delight me, my entire life becomes something I call my secret kingdom, where I experience luck, timing, and synchronicity on a level that would make most people's eyes roll in the back of their head. And so, yeah, keep your wins and your miracles on a need-to-know basis, and you just may find yourself experience more luck and more miracles more often. In so many words, when we go looking for miracles, they usually don't happen. And that's why living a life of simple, focused, passionate action opens you up to more miracles, at least I found in my experience. Because you are tapping into more power by occupying your conscious mind with things you find enjoyable, instead of sitting around wishing, hoping, and expecting for things to happen. That's why passionate action is a cure for many dis-eases. Another trick to this is realizing that what other people call negative circumstances doesn't have to be negative for you. In other words, letting someone label something as bad news can almost completely block out your ability to harvest positive outcomes from the inevitable setbacks and surprises of life. Are you living your life through someone else's fear-based lens? It's important to understand that most people are stuck in their patterns because they are afraid of what they might actually learn about themselves, afraid of what they might have to unlearn in the face of what the world truly is, and what it can offer those who are open to new experiences. So, what does it mean to be awake and aware in the greater cosmic picture? First, it's about understanding how your shadows and unconscious can keep you roped in codependency until you decide you are ready to transcend it through some version of what we've just outlined. Secondly, it's about understanding you already contain the resources you need to take action now in the moment on your highest excitement, which will lead you to a new moment where you can have a new host of choices. In other words, life works best for those who are willing to get on the bike and ride, instead of talking about one day when they get on the bike, or maybe they get a good enough bike and they will ride it and they will go to the moon and soar with the best of them. Well, in this case, your body is your bike, and there is nobody on earth who can tell you the limit of what your creative potential is. Our society is full of countless stories of people who were told they would never walk again, or they only had a few weeks to live, and they defied all predictions and thrived anyhow. It all starts with a choice to thrive, and I give you permission to thrive. Why? Why not? Now, if you're planning to be around for any length of time, it's really helpful to acquire useful and updated skills. Skills that are useful to you and the society you owe your comforts to, like grocery stores, running water, and plumbing, etc. So, what about operating as an informed human on planet Earth, navigating the great shift of ages? It's about being able to walk with a foot in both worlds. We can all relate to the idea of being in a pickle and then pausing to reflect on the problem where we're feeling stuck or in a high intensity situation, only then to have an epiphany, a moment of aha, a stroke of luck, to meet the right person at the right time, where everything worked out just perfectly. This is where skills you can learn can ensure you are never afraid you will back yourself into a corner financially, emotionally, or whatever it is you are afraid will happen if you take more empowered action on your progress and on your passion. The skills of modern economics doesn't mean being a math wizard. It means understanding how to budget and share resources efficiently and with transparency and accountability. It also doesn't mean being greedy and parasitic. But it does mean knowing how to stand up and negotiate for yourself relative to your contribution and investment. This is the part where most people get shaky legs and crawl back into their cave. These are the challenges of our time, and this is what my new platform, Elevated Executive, is all about. We have learning pathways for leaders at all progress levels. Many times the mind wants to create all of these stories. I got to do this before I do that, before I do this, before I do that, before I do this. And a lot of people live their life in that exact same pattern. This before, and then they don't do anything. Barely get the laundry done, barely get their bed made. And usually it revolves around these grand narratives of conspiracy. This over here is corrupt. If I go take action over there, they'll take my money anyhow. This is just going to work out bad. These negative assumptions that keep us playing small and keep us playing stuck. But it does come down to learning new skills, how to negotiate for yourself, to believe you're worth negotiating in, or believe you're worth negotiating for, right? And standing up for what you believe in. These things all relate to confidence and competence, which is where the skills come in. So what would it mean to you to be more open to the ideas, insights, and energies that deliver more luck, good timing, good feeling, and synchronicities in your life? What skills are you willing to learn to be able to ground those energies into beneficial systems, tools, and expressions for you and your community? Perhaps even render yourself more able to perceive, communicate, and interact with those beings who have liberated themselves from the gravity of the planet and the polluting energy systems that keep us locked into local orbit. While beings from other planets and dimensions don't seem to land and communicate physically on a daily basis, most of these advanced races and beings apparently that I've studied can be interacted with in the physical domain. Right there, many of us have been taught to fear our psychic power, what it means to be open to it, and how to embrace the idea of our connectedness in the higher dimensions. I know this is a strange edge for society at this time, but I think we deny our humanity the gift of evolution by denying our inherent abilities. Much like cultures are taught to suppress their sexual energy instead of being taught to seek knowledge, to constructively channel and understand and celebrate it. And really, anytime we deny, deflect, or suppress a part of ourselves, we open ourselves up to suffering. And when a culture or society does it on a widespread basis, it can become a big problem. That is what this series is all about, embracing our cosmic heritage and healing from the traumas of the old paradigm. My goal is to help societies around the world draw healthy lines of interaction and understanding between perhaps the space travelers and their science-type religion, which also informs their laws of physics and results in their apparent ability to unlock non-linear space travel and so-called free or vacuum-based energy. I always get a kick out of the stiff-necked college graduate who talks confidently about the laws of physics that cannot be broken, instead of saying something more accurate like, these are the current bounds of our scientists' understanding of physics. Instead, they state it in absolute terms, often with hubris and emotional superiority for anyone who dares challenge the religion of scientism they have been conditioned to operate under. So make no mistake, when groupthink takes over a scientific hierarchy, science quickly behaves more like a religion, especially political science. That's what I mean when I say scientism. It's no different between the white-haired scientist who wears a white lab coat and translates complex spreadsheets than it is the old guy with a white beard wearing white robes who interprets arcane ancient texts. The fact is, religions can form anywhere where a lack of critical thinking and personal practical experimentation is discouraged. So, what is true sustained enlightenment? Why do so few allegedly achieve it? And what does it mean for us living during a time of unprecedented societal transformation? And how will the coming age of enlightened humans unlock a new wave of clean and healthy technology, therefore another chapter of experience and evolution for our societies? These are the questions of our time. And not just a time of unprecedented transition, but a time where much of the bloodshed happening around the world is due to arguing over arcane scripts and documents written for a time that is almost incomparable to what we are living today. Not only that, but I'm truly sorry if your leaders, like we see in America, in positions of authority and prominence, who willfully reduce their intelligence to a low-resolution, outdated view of reality, locked into what I call a miserable cast of 4 astral characters, i.e. God, devil, angels, and demons. That's all they're talking about, yet they haven't met any of them. Where are we operating from experience and first-hand authority? And where are we deferring our authority and power to so-called beings beyond? I call this living life in low resolution. So, well, are you ready to live life in high definition? I'm talking about grown-ass adults in elevated positions of elected office speaking in serious tone using these old paradigm words as if they are some authority on the subject. They are not any more of an authority than you are on living life in this dimension and domain. And I think that really matters, and your voice matters. It's almost like they are eager to go back to Stupidville and just dismiss mountains of physical and personal evidence that our universe is teeming with a full spectrum of conscious life, from plasma beings who travel from star to star, as well as the extraterrestrials our government seem to so eagerly cover up and black box the evidence of. I realize the government will never admit to something they don't believe they have control of. These are the challenges of our time. In other words, and in conclusion, when we approach the vast potential of the cosmos with a dark age, super limited, outdated, old world belief system, we are more likely to see the universe through a dark age lens of endless enemies and demons rather than arriving as curious equals eager to learn and grow. Some of you already understand this, but there are still many people around the world who will probably not be in a headspace to be able to transcend these concepts in their natural lifetime. And this is something we have to be prepared for in terms of how we advocate for global peace, accountability, and prosperity, often in the face of those who claim their religion gives them authority to supersede the free will or welfare of another person. These are the challenges of our time. Not only that, but most of the Abrahamic faiths, where Christianity, Islam, and Judaism all branch from, often proclaim that God is mad, our ancestors messed up a long time ago, and at least with the Christians, that God gave his only son, and you guys killed him, and now things are about to get bad before Jesus returns. So you'd better get on your knees, partake in simulated blood rituals, deity worship, and digging of bunkers and tunnels, waiting for Jesus or Allah or whoever to return. Mainly because you are dirty, guilty, and powerless in this dynamic of good and evil. How on earth can an all-powerful God only have the ability to create one son? And also, why would any God, but an absolutely evil God, create a bunch of human lives and only give them a few decades to find Jesus or Allah, or otherwise he sends them to eternal hellfire and suffering? Some of you laugh, but this is the superstitious operating system that drives a lot more people, including people in leadership, than anyone is comfortable admitting. Why? Because their grandfather taught it to them. Who taught it to them, who taught it to them, who taught it to them. The thread that binds it all is a lack of critical and courageous thinking. Growing up in a Christian church, I know this firsthand, and according to my Muslim friends, this story is very similar and is the cause for much of the violence happening in the Middle East. As I was fortunate to make more Muslim-born friends over the last 10 years, and I got to learn about their inherited stories, I was always fascinated by how similar the stories and archetypes were that disempowered Christians in America circulated, to the stories that frustrated Muslims circulate as well. Slightly different characters change, but the rationalizations and justifications are largely the same archetypes. It's a classic case of proverbial and perpetual emperor has no clothes, but the people are too afraid and these days too obsessed with political correctness than to call something for what it is. Okay, Let's dive one more layer deep into how we can help our societies heal from religious trauma and truly seek to understand the slippery conditions that religion and superstition can create within the minds of people who hold these ideas as fact. These are often members in your community who are struggling with addiction, mental health, and self harm. And around the world, as you watch this, countless humans are still locked into the which religion is better conversation instead of what is religion and what should we do about it conversation. It's also why I shared in episode 2 why most American Christian identifying men are physically weak, often overweight, morally unclear, and unsure how to be a strong Christian in the world. It's because most of these men don't know what they stand on or why. I attribute this directly to how modern Western Christianity has been reduced to a cult-like dynamic of worshiping a deity instead of studying and testing the alleged words and teachings of Jesus yourself. The term Christian means to be Christ-like. And if we take the metaphor of awakening and realization to mean that we truly grasp the idea that we are all derived from the same source, and that if we exist, we have a purpose, not even from a spiritual warm and fuzzy standpoint, but from a practical law of physics standpoint, to me, that all makes more sense to my scientific sensibilities. I call it living the experiment, something I invite you to test for yourself. And for those who are struggling either themselves or with a loved one who has deeply entrenched fundamentalist, Christian, or other religious views, in the links below this week's video, I provided a brief but thorough deep dive into a crystal clear snapshot of how the word hell is obviously a King James fabrication translated through a Dark Age lens in an attempt to control a population. And for my Christian friends, I often see them consider what it might mean to transcend the religion they were indoctrinated into. But then the idea of what if I'm wrong comes into the picture, and also what will my family think if I stop using their cult-like language like the blood of Christ and sacrificial lamb and other Dark Age ideas and assumptions. And how do we embody the value of Christ consciousness, which to me, and I would assert the alleged extraterrestrials I've had conversations with, is the core idea and the key takeaway from Christianity anyhow. This idea that we are all one and all originate from the same source, so what we do to another, we do to ourselves, and what we do for ourselves, we also do for another. That link is there for you and anyone who is unsure about what to believe or even to better understand why strict adherence to fundamentalist teachings often leads to groupthink that looks a lot like mental illness, paranoia, self-harm, violence, and cult-like behavior. The same is true in Islamic and probably even Hebrew lineages. Many adults today are tasked with managing inherited lineages of family businesses, wealth resources, etc., that are beholden to the old-timers who carry these old-world ideas. And this is not an easy headlock to escape from for many young adults with these resources that they've inherited around the world today. I know for me, overcoming the belief system I was indoctrinated into required my understanding that those often well-meaning people who translated copies of our oldest texts largely had no idea what they were talking about. And I mean that with all due respect to those who are unwilling to evolve their thinking. But these are the challenges of our time. In all due respect to the old-timers, there are plenty of valuable lessons to learn from the pages of history. But that's the problem. How do you know what you are reading is actual history? And if it's not easy to prove, is it even relevant? We don't have to look any further than the global cultures of the last few hundred years to recognize societies that strive to operate free and fair elections are those who can build societies and governments that can consistently build nations that benefit more people more of the time. In turn, those societies are more powerful and more capable of self-determining their own destiny than those that do not. This is the classic victim-oppressor, strong-weak narrative that's circulating widely and wildly around the world right now. And this is where people with various opinions about how government should and shouldn't be run rush in. But what have you actually done to provide value and insight to your community instead of just endlessly regurgitating poorly fact-checked, politicized opinions? What is your relationship to power? This is an important question to ask yourself. When we think about how we use our productive years to build a career, raise a family, and make our years and our efforts count in ways that are meaningful and productive to you. And I'm 100% okay if you disagree with anything I say. I do my best to put ideas to the test and to look in the real world what ideas are producing more prosperity and more stability for more people, and I'll plant my flag there until someone can convince me otherwise. If you have a habit of running away from opinions you disagree with, I invite you to consider how this may be causing you to live a small and fearful life, divorced from your creative power and personal integrity. If you believe something, research it and stand for it. If you say you believe something, but don't research it and stand for it, do you really believe it? And I don't just mean research something to affirm your existing bias. Rather, research it from an angle that you just might be wrong, incorrect, or are missing important information. All right, so we're going to continue. If you need a break, take a break. We covered quite a lot of information. Okay, now that we've got the dirty work handled, this next concept for me personally is the most exciting idea of this entire series. There is a healthy line of questioning to be had here, which says something like, okay, Kyle, if most of these earth-based religions are misguided, do we just descend into a state of moral anarchy or moral relativism where anything goes? And the answer is, of course not. This is also where my liberal friends encounter their own type of ideologically driven mental health problems when gender becomes relative and the important social systems meant to keep women safe in respect to their unique biological needs start to unravel. And this often comes from a well-meaning place. And when I say my liberal friends, I mean my friends. And I see some of them seriously confused right now, wanting to accommodate the needs of others while not being sure how that affects the others that might be negatively affected. These are the challenges of our time. So the challenge is that the roles of society are created by the majority, but still must also protect the minority or the meek. If we fail to do that, we will fail as a society. It doesn't matter which side, left or right, it comes from. Anytime there is anger, hatred, secret agenda, etc., that means there is mistrust, fear, and anger in the mix. And those efforts will never lead to positive outcomes. If hate, anger, and animosity are part of your justification of action, you need healing, nutrition, and reflection, not a bigger microphone or a marketing budget. Why? Because energy is energy, and what you put out is what you'll get back. Now, a society's laws are written to help define what justifies the initiation of violence and how to respond to those who do it. If you think you have better ideas for your society in these subjects, then learn how to use your power intelligently and constructively to effect change. Acting in an entitled way or making a sign and go out to virtue signal with your friends, yeah, it's valuable on some level. Protesters have their place. But still, it's a very weak step towards using the power your society gives you to bring good people and information together and affect real, lasting positive change. Staying at home and complaining with your friends on social media isn't going to do you much good either. These are the challenges of our time. And to the credit of anyone who experiences gender dysphoria, people in society are often very unkind to these people. So people who identify as different in society are often operating from their own type of trauma-driven patterns and trying to heal, and sometimes even wanting others to feel their pain, which is what violence is at the end of the day. If you think about it, violence is a natural expression by those who don't feel heard or those who don't know how to voice their needs or their pain. The same is true on either political edge of any society. At what point does a person feel justified to become radicalized? And what story do they tell themselves to get there? Now, let's take it all the way to the so-called psychopath, career criminal, narcissist, and others who justify harmful actions and deception. They are often the most damaged, separated, and often dangerous. However, they can only exist in systems where people willfully suppress the evidence of their corruption. A self-empowered and self-policing work culture recognizes that hurt people, and that people who would partake in willful theft and coercion would benefit from more health and nutrition-focused rehabilitation before it's too late and they earn their spot in a prison or the criminal system. And the idea of even giving somebody a label is in some ways to villainize them anyhow, and this can be a tempting thing. So the question is, what good do we do anyone when we participate in these energies? All we actually do is build further distance, separation, and pain for ourselves and our communities when we act this way. Only in understanding do we heal and ultimately transcend. Still, I believe we must strive to bring good science and good information and good nutrition to our communities as a foundation. Otherwise, our bodies lack the ability to think clearly and separate fact from fiction. The cost of disregarding balanced nutrition and education for all children is a price we only pay 18 years later when that child is not able to function effectively in society. And the cost of raising a healthy child from 0 to 18 is far less than keeping an adult in prison for the rest of their lives. On all levels. And, well, is this society's responsibility or is it the individual's responsibility? And what do we do if one or the other fails? So our children and future generations don't pay the price for our apathy, from us turning a blind eye to the recognition of what poverty and malnutrition can do to a person and entire segments of society. And now, with 20 years of experience of teen leadership, I've realized when the nutrition is right and the sufficient emotional support is in place, that people tend to have greater internal resources to learn, grow, heal, and evolve. And if the nutrition is right, good, simple, straightforward education also takes root more easily. In other words, when people have access to education, nutrition, shelter, and relative safety, you can't keep a person from thriving. At least that's been my experience. And education is a type of nutrition that opens the mind to new vistas of experience, something that is essential for a person to thrive and maximize their potential. These are the challenges of our time, and guess what? We already produce enough vegetables and healthy foods to catalyze a wellness revolution. On that same coin, you also have to respect where other people are in their journey as they move through various levels of ignorance and learning themselves, just like we all have to do from time to time in order to grow and learn. And society can change, but it happens slowly, and best of all, in most places around the world today, we can all choose better food and better information in our lives today, which is why many of you are watching this video. So, congratulations, there is work to do, but you also have to get off that crusade wagon that you must suffer and save others. That's a false teaching that leads many people into miserable outcomes and even justified violence. It's far better that you lie flat and don't get out of your bed until your actions can be an expression of your own personal joy and harmony. And if all you did was take care of yourself very well, to the best of your ability, including healing, nutrition, and self-education around things that really light you up, that would be enough to positively impact your community. That is and always will be your highest service to the people you care about. And anyone who might expect you to do otherwise may not have your best interest in mind. These are the challenges of our time, and this is what it means to heal from a toxic family or work system that suppresses information like abuse or threats of violence or corruption, etc. And violence and abuse is often circulated at home and at work for a long time before it spills into the streets. That's why staying quiet on abuse is not a good idea. Still, use skill and support to choose and use your words carefully. That's what Elevated Executive is all about, supporting leaders to affect change in their communities and for causes they care about. Links are in the description. So, what do you believe is possible for you? In a lot of ways, you have to decide that for yourself, because only you really know what you're capable of and what your best path through life is. And ultimately, you have to make decisions for yourself. And then, you get to let life decide who you should surround yourself with. Because once you start making decisions related to self-care, healing, and career, sometimes you may not be around the same people by the time you reach your full potential in life, and it's important to be okay with that. The truth is, nobody can help you with these early steps that you must do for yourself, and sometimes you must do alone. You will feel afraid from time to time, frustrated, unsure, and uncertain. What matters is you keep putting one foot in front of the other toward the goals in life that you want. Of course, family matters, but not if the current scenario is keeping you stuck in cycles of addiction and poor self-care. There are links in the description for you to consider if you need to reach for some help so you can heal and find the time and space to heal in order for you to thrive. At this point, someone asked me, Kyle, what do you believe? I believe in the power of belief, in the power of focused thought to accelerate and catalyze what we prefer to happen in our physical reality. That is what this series is all about. And by the way, if you need a break, take a break. We're going to keep going and finish strong today. So, what about belief? What about our ability to turn our thoughts and ideas into language and ideas others can understand and get inspired by? I believe language is code, and belief systems, which are made of language, are a type of code that either help us to operate effectively in life, enjoyably and accurately around the world, or not. This means that if there is something in your life you want to change, it's a good idea to stay teachable and consider that you may have been taught a load of horseshit about some things in your life and your reality. Maybe your well-meaning parents taught you how to live in a poverty cycle, and by poverty cycle, I'm talking about emotional poverty first, which inevitably manifests in physical life and in your wallet or your pocketbook. A person who feels emotionally rich and supported has no fear of material poverty because sustenance is not derived on this plane, it is experienced and expressed here. I know that can be a hard one to wrap your mind around, but it's good to think about any time you believe you don't have what you need in order to take passionate or inspired action, and what those stories are. This is those few brief moments where meditation, reflection, and rest can bring clarity and realignment in powerful ways to recognize, hey, I can at least take this step. This is a step I can take today. It might make me a little nervous, but I'm going to do it anyhow. I also believe you deserve to be happy and fulfilled in the pursuit of your heart's highest aspirations. I believe that is our purpose far more than any sense of duty or obligation to dysfunctional or corrupt systems. If you can write a sentence, you can write code. I've made a living writing words for websites. It pays really well, and it's a type of code. Language is code. And anyone who writes code will tell you that the best code is concise, well conceived, and thoroughly tested. So here goes. I'm going to introduce you to some source code that might be defined as my belief system, that just may help you upgrade your mental software as it has for me. Mental software perhaps for the times we are headed towards, not the ones we are quickly leaving. So, in a previous episode, I shared the idea that a more optimized view of spirituality may be that it's simply a common thread of connection that affects and connects us all. Why does it need to be more than that? Why do we have to weave complex narratives and try to force others to believe and participate in our inherited versions of spirituality? When someone asks me my spiritual beliefs, I say, life appears to be an experiment with no guarantees, and there are lessons that, when we learn them, clearly help us make our lives better, more comfortable, and more fulfilling. Beyond that, I believe it's anybody's guess, because the distant past is relatively improvable and the future isn't guaranteed. So it's what we do in the moment that makes the most difference. I also believe our consciousness likely extends beyond this linear timeline, and we preserve the key insights and elements from a lifetime. But who or what we are on that level is probably almost inconceivable to the linear brain, advanced primate chassis we seem to temporarily inhabit and operate on this plane and domain. So that's my source code these days. What's yours? Feel free to borrow, modify, and experiment with it if you like. So what do you believe and why? And have you put it to the test? Of course, these are the challenges of our time. So finally today, we're going to take this one step further, which brings us to our key point, considering a non-religious perspective on Christ consciousness. The core idea of Christ consciousness, as we said earlier, is very simple. As far as I can tell, Christ and others like him have achieved, grounded, and embodied the idea that we are all connected. Essentially, we are all part of the same puzzle, or branches from the same tree. And that's why what we do to another, we do to ourselves. And that's why what we do for ourselves, we do for another. Can it be that simple? I think it can, and I'm convinced it can. Every day I live this way, my life gets better, more rewarding, and enjoyable, and challenging, but in a much more adventurous and capable way. Living this way is a skill. It's a learned habit, but it requires unlearning patterns of oppression, self-abandonment, self-harm, self-neglect, and all of the other dark age distortions our ancestors circulated. What can you say other than it was a different age, a different time, and perhaps a different operating system for people operating in a different time? Can that be enough? Truly, I don't care what you believe. I care what you know and are willing to learn, verify, and take action on through your own life experiment, because that's what really matters. Or it turns into the thing that you call your material life, at least as far as I can tell. Not so much trust, faith, or hope in a deity or some savior. I haven't found that's not needed to operate powerfully in this life. For me, it's been about simply knowing that I exist, and therefore I am equal on some level to whatever I may experience. In that, I choose to meet my destiny in all that I encounter as a respectful student, and to meet my life, and perhaps one day my maker, on my feet and not on my knees. Of course, this brings up the religious idea of people getting down on their knees to pray for this or that. I'm not so sure about that, at least not now in the new paradigm. Your thrust and your evolution always comes from self-empowerment first, which is then reflected in your life and society. This is also where skills like communication and emotional awareness can render you more able to share your ideas in a way where they are understood. Now, if you've been an egotistical jerk, seeking forgiveness can be powerful, but again, how many more times are you going to get down on your knees and beg for forgiveness for the same cycle you're in? Only change behavior and standing on your own 2 feet so you can take care of yourself and other people aren't burdened by you and your choices. These are the challenges of our time. So who knows? Maybe you're in a necessary stage of your evolution where you need to be on your knees a little more than on your feet. But only you can break the cycles of rage, regret, and apathy. It's the same for others in their lives too. So what helps break those cycles faster than anything else? My experience, taking care of yourself, having the courage to take care of yourself, having the courage to prioritize yourself and your needs first before the requests of others. It's an interesting one. Especially with the religious trauma, you're taught to give with disregard for self. I'm not sure about that pyramid scheme. Truly getting your nutrition right and exercising regularly, turning off trash social media and getting away from toxic people who would rather service their addictions than get accountable to healing and growth. Are you ready to change? The truth is, we all are ready to change a little bit each day, and we usually don't change a lot in any given day. If we try too hard, then we end up snapping back where we started typically. So I think you're going to like the new visual I have prepared for you today. It's meant to help people get unstuck and help others do the same when they are ready, because everything in this reality is about relationships. And, well, what are you willing to get off your knees and stand for? In this life, it seems we are free to choose, but we are also bound to the consequences of our choices, including not making a choice, which is still a choice with consequences. I think it's fascinating that any religion that tries to convince you that you are inferior or separate from God also tries to sell you their solution. Their solution. Rub your belly, pat your head, put money in our cup, and be sure to come back next week, or whatever ritual they need to sell you that keeps you putting money in their bucket. Anyone who has told you that you are separate from your higher power has become your jailer, and you are their hostage. So when we can see the old stories for what they are, and from a clean slate consider a lighter, leaner mental operating system that recognizes our ego existence and connection to the whole, we can finally begin to see the world for what it is. That brings me to share the new graphic we made for today's video. What does it mean to be a conscious navigator and co-creator of the new paradigm, operating from a place of empowerment, taking greater ownership of your emotions and your life situation? How does this show up in your life, in the daily choices you make? Are you a fit, rational, and sober actor in the world, or are you weighed down with belief systems that keep you reactive and fearful? In the next video, I'm going to publicly share for the first time the life-changing communications I've had with experiencers and their alleged extraterrestrial counterparts, and the life-changing conclusions those conversations catalyzed for me. What does it mean to study from a society that is anywhere from 100 to 1,000 years in our future? This is the purpose of this series, to help people understand what it means to see the chessboard from above the game, and how most of the species that interact with humanity all share similar ideas of oneness, and that it's not just a faith or belief, it's a matter of understanding the laws of physics from a higher level, just like Jesus and other prophets and visionaries who did their best to explain that to the people of their time. Not just that, but your personal passion, interest, excitement, and motivation are essential to not only your success, but also your ability to serve your community and give back meaningfully. And to the degree you deny or defer acting on your passion, you separate yourself from a higher degree of creative power and creative resource that many people in the New Age world and spiritual communities, they call it synchronicity. I believe the term synchronicity has Greek origins, but was popularized by Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist in the early 1900s. This speaks to the idea that when you act on your highest excitement, you will be supported by the very act of your living your truth, but often not in ways you can expect or anticipate. This is where the so-called faith walk comes in, and also developing skills that are useful and transferable in the world you work and live in today. Not the reality you hope you will appear in the near future. I'm talking about the skills that pay the bills today. Yes, in other words, if you are experiencing scarcity in your life today in any area, healing starts when you start taking ownership over the experience, which often includes conversations about society and the responsibilities of the individual and the responsibilities of the state, and these things that matter in the world today. And also, yes, to the intuition and the passion, but also the skills. Skip any of one of those three ingredients, and you're going to have a tough time in this time-space reality. Skills, passion, intuition. We will discuss unlocking near-perfect harmony in those three areas in more detail in the next video. But for now, before we shift to today's visuals, I'd like to invite you to consider one more controversial idea. The reward of a society that realizes oneness consciousness and evolves beyond the idea of a separate consciousness is the emergence of a science that could help our species effortlessly navigate the cosmos in a way that transcends both the bounds of Earth's gravity and the illusions of space-time and physical distance. Regardless of how many frustrated physicists claim it's impossible, a thing is always impossible until it's done. And by reward, I'm not talking about a reward from some angry and bipolar sky daddy. I'm talking about a simple cause and effect, like planting food and growing it properly. That careful blend of skills, science, and intuition that anyone who grows food or spends time in nature understands. Harmonize yourself with the intelligent cycles of nature, and her secrets will unlock for you. And I would assert that it's the same idea regarding how there are likely various extraterrestrial races interacting with humans and have been perhaps since the beginning of whatever a human is. Maybe they have been here all along, but for whatever reason, certain people, and in this case, most people, can't perceive them or perceive them regularly. And just because we can't perceive them doesn't mean they don't affect our evolution. And I'm not asking any of you to believe any of this. Rather, put it to the test for yourself. The rest of the series begins to be about the changes I sense we are likely to face as a species that is willing to face the pain and healing of our past and our origin stories and awaken to our broader story and cosmic origins. And I believe this awakening potential is true on the individual level as well as the collective potential. Still, try out some new ideas, put them to the test, and see what works for you, and leave the rest that doesn't work. In that, I see you as an equal, a mystery, and a co creator in the world we appear to be creating together. In that sense, we are all in this together. Okay, so for today's visuals, we're going to go a little deeper into the mystery of the physics of the reality we seem to share. Looked at from my best summary of what I've learned, the spacefaring societies all seem to circulate in one fashion or another. Specifically, the societies that have broken the chains of gravity and even the fabric of space time itself. Please keep in mind these are words, and ultimately words fail. I encourage you to have an open dialogue with people you care about regarding what it means for you to be healthy and happy and on your own personal path of your own felt sense of the maximization of your potential. All right, so in the last video, we talked briefly about the idea that spacefaring societies, they have this idea, the concept of the one, which is we are all aspects or um, pieces of the one, the whole, the collective physical whole. And therefore, we all fit together, and therefore, um, each piece is essential to the whole. And so we also talked about this little map where we discussed the idea of the relationship between some key terms that religions and various groups try to do their best to explain, and often um, say that they end up getting confused and things get mixed up, especially for the time we're living in today, and understanding how these spacefaring societies try to speak about this idea of oneness in a way where it's practical and understanding that these are a series of relationships between the body, the mind, the soul, and the oversoul. I do suggest you go back and watch that other episode because there's some foundational items for this map that we cover there. But today we're going to go one layer deeper and zoom in on something else a little bit more detailed. So having a little fun here today, we've added a little more complexity to the map. If you see over to the right there, the same line and thread of relationships continue from the one to the oversoul to the soul to the mind and to the body. And of course, the body is comprised of, looking at the middle of your screen here, I'll try to zoom in for you, is comprised of many elements, parts of me, right? Part of me wants to go do this. Part of me wants to go do this. Part of me has this desire, but part of me has this desire. In the ancient Hindu systems, these are called the chakras or the energy centers of the body. And I think it's pretty obvious these can be interacted with. And as we awaken to more spiritual awareness and understanding, these ideas can be opened up and activated in ways that are very powerful, specifically to our own personal evolution. So, zooming out, moving over a little bit, with our body and our mind, through our soul and oversoul connected to the one, we then interface with family, right? Who then lives in a society. It's another node of relationships. And on planet Earth, we also, if we connect the line, we've got tribal and indigenous people who live under a certain and different code, tribe A, tribe B, and then the planet as a whole, and the animals on the planet, and maybe some pollution there too, right? Because societies and groups tend to leave certain things that we need to be aware of. So just having a little fun here today, but it's important to consider that if you're stuck, usually you've got a negative definition about one of these. Not only negative, but disempowered that, oh, why can't I can't go do this because I'm just going to ruin it anyhow, or the things are already bad. It doesn't make any sense because, you know, we've already destroyed the planet and there's no hope, right? When you get to these narratives of hopelessness, that's when you really devolve your potential, the belief that you can't or shouldn't. But the fact is, you're here, and you're probably here for a reason. And that if you are here and you are here for a reason, then you can do something and you can affect change. And this is where, to me, these other two nodes that are connected in a slightly different way up here, you see the astral influences and ET influences. And well, we discussed in a previous episode, I believe it was episode 2, that not all beings who even appear as human are actually physical beings. They can be astral beings. People have encountered different archetypes, some that claim to do not even have a physical body, but they are an intelligence from another realm that temporarily overlaps and interacts with certain people to deliver certain information and messages. And this is all one big energy system, a one energy organic system of consciousness and exchange. And the more you can see that in a natural way, and it's all part of the overall ecosystem of reality, and the planet Earth is just one, layer of that for us and for anybody else who's aware of planet Earth that is out here in the galaxies doing whatever it is that they do. And well, moving up one level there, you have the ET influences, and well, some of these ET influences are um, in some ways adamant that they are less physical than we are as humans on this planet, and they are evolving beyond physicality, some of the ET races say. So this isn't really about a hierarchy because I think these can both influence society and clearly have lots of history, historical accounts of rare, but still fairly persistent influences on our society throughout time. And I think it's simply unwise and relatively ignorant and rude to assume that these things aren't happening in the sense that the witch hunts and we gaslight people. If their story doesn't fit into our religion, we call it a demon or a devil. All of these things reduce our ability to think clearly and increase our potential for mental health issues when we refuse to see reality and take people at their word and help them understand or explain what they experience as clearly as they can and what do we do with these experiences. In some ways, that's what this series is all about. So I think there's an interesting connection here. One last thing I'll say today, and we can wrap this up. But understanding the parts of your body that want different things, understanding the relationships that your body affects in the cosmos, and that if you exist for a reason, and that there is an energetic connection to the whole. And from some physical standpoint, I don't think you need a lot of faith and rationalization of hope to say, hey, my perspective matters. I wouldn't be here if, I wasn't here for a reason. And if I'm going to be here, I might as well be healthy. I might as well make good choices. I might as well choose what feels best to me in the moment. And well, sometimes that means going and having a piece of pizza and a beer. Sometimes it means, studying and taking care of your nutrition and exercise, right? It's all about right moment and right timing. So when we think about this connection of relationships, and not just when we think about it, when we honor these various elements that have reasons for us being here, in some ways, our soul, through a mind and a body, is sponsored from the oversoul, perhaps all the way back to the one. What does that mean? This is where the mysteries of the cosmos, tend to leave us lacking for words. And so I'm not going to put any more words to this today, but have fun with this map. It'll be linked below. And if you're feeling confused, if you're feeling unsure, zoom out, look at it from the big picture, from the big, the big plan, and you'll see that, well, we can always make progress from where we stand today. And that's the big takeaway for this today.
All right, so in conclusion of this episode, what does it mean to heal from the collective and individual trauma of the old paradigm? That's a unique journey, but we are all on it together. Trauma affects us all one way or another, and the body keeps score. Healing and compassion are the foundation of the society we want, but where do we draw the line of healthy responsibility between the responsibility of the individual to society and the responsibility of society to the individual? These are the challenges of our time. The next episode is all about the new roles society will be shaped by, now that everyone has 4K cameras and soon to be satellite internet in their pocket. We will also cover the idea of what it may mean to be participating in a society that is openly interacting with off-world species and influences. If you enjoy these thought-provoking conversations, I encourage you to do your research and bring some of your own ideas to the table. Let me know in the comments what you think. After all, blaming is lazy and relatively easy and gets us absolutely nowhere. Finally, if you know a smart leader who wants to stay up with the times, there are links in the description to learn about what applying to elevated executive looks like. The working world is changing, but not so quickly that you can't keep up. As always, the future belongs to the builders and problem solvers. Thank you. The links are below.